The chamber fell silent as Kemi Badenoch rose to speak. In a moment that would soon dominate headlines, she delivered a scathing critique of Prime Minister Keir Starmer's policies, leaving him visibly unsettled. The tension was palpable, and the audience was left in stunned silence. In the heart of Parliament, Kemi Badenoch confronted Prime Minister Keir Starmer with a pointed question about the government's decision to cut winter fuel payments for pensioners. This policy change had left millions of elderly citizens facing the prospect of a cold winter without financial assistance. Badenoch's challenge was direct. Why has the Prime Minister broken his promise to cut energy bills by 300? Starmer's response emphasised the government's commitment to renewable energy and the extension of the Warm Homes discount to 6 million households. However, Badenoch was quick to highlight the discrepancy between the government's promises and the reality faced by pensioners. She pointed out that despite the UK's significant investment in renewable energy, the country still faced some of the highest energy bills in Europe. The exchange underscored a growing concern among citizens about the government's energy policies and their impact on vulnerable populations. Badenoch's critique resonated with many who felt that the government's actions were out of touch with the struggles of everyday people. As the debate continued, the atmosphere in the chamber grew increasingly charged. Badenoch's unwavering stance and pointed questions left Starmer on the defensive, struggling to justify the government's decisions. The confrontation highlighted a significant rift in the government's approach to energy policy and its consequences for the nation's most vulnerable citizens. This moment in Parliament served as a stark reminder of the importance of holding leaders accountable for their promises and the real-world implications of policy decisions. The exchange between Badenoch and Starmer will undoubtedly continue to fuel discussions about the direction of the UK's energy policy and its impact on the population. As the confrontation between Kemi Badenoch and Keir Starmer unfolded, the focus sharply turned to the Labour leader's green energy strategy, an area he once held up as his flagship achievement. Badenoch, never one to shy away from exposing contradictions, laid bare the startling truth. Starmer's ambitious net-zero policies were not only faltering, but were actively harming the very citizens they were meant to help. She underscored that while Starmer promoted sweeping changes in climate policy, millions of Britons were being punished with rising costs, crumbling infrastructure, and unreliable energy supplies. The disconnect between grand speeches and daily realities had never been more glaring. With firm composure, Badenoch began to detail the hidden costs of Starmer's green agenda. Billions of pounds had been allocated to wind and solar energy, yet these investments hadn't translated into cheaper bills or more stable service. Households, especially in working-class communities, were being hit with mounting energy bills, while industrial regions were facing layoffs due to soaring operational costs. Despite promises of a green revolution, Badenoch claimed that what the country had received instead was chaos, economic strain, and political spin. In her takedown, she referenced the Prime Minister's controversial decision to delay new oil and gas licences in the North Sea, an effort to please environmental activists at the expense of energy security. This decision, Badenoch argued, had weakened Britain's energy independence and forced the country to rely more heavily on expensive imports from volatile regions. In essence, the UK was at the mercy of foreign markets, and the public was paying the price. She warned that if Starmer's government continued down this path, it wouldn't just be an economic crisis, it would be a national security disaster. Public outrage was already brewing across the country. Energy bills had skyrocketed over the past 2 years, and many pensioners were choosing between heating and eating. Meanwhile, Labour ministers insisted that the transition to green energy was on track and necessary for future generations. Badenoch countered this narrative with compelling data, showing that despite all the rhetoric, the UK still lagged behind many European nations in renewable efficiency while leading in energy poverty. It was, she claimed, a humiliating and dangerous irony. Kemi Badenoch's fiery speech sent shockwaves through the chamber and beyond. She didn't just dismantle Starmer's policies, she painted a picture of a country under siege from ideological zealotry masquerading as progress. Her words resonated especially strongly with rural and industrial voters, many of whom felt abandoned by Labour's urban-focused policies. They saw in Badenoch a politician willing to fight for the ignored, the sidelined and the silenced. Her directness contrasted starkly with Starmer's polished evasions, giving the public a rare moment of clarity in an otherwise foggy political landscape. In a particularly powerful moment, Badenoch exposed how many green initiatives were being funded not by progressive taxation, but by stealth levies on ordinary households. Hidden surcharges on energy bills, she explained, were funneling billions into government schemes that had yet to yield meaningful results. This revelation ignited fury among backbench MPs and audience members alike, with murmurs echoing across the chamber. Badenoch used this momentum to hammer home a crucial point. Climate action without accountability is not just ineffective, it's dangerous. The climax of her argument came when she directly challenged Starmer's leadership. "It is not climate denial," she declared, "to question the cost, the delivery, and the consequences of your policy. It is basic leadership, and Prime Minister, leadership is exactly what this nation is lacking." The room erupted. Some MPs rose to applaud, others shouted in defence of Starmer, but the moment was unforgettable. It was clear that Badenoch had struck a nerve, exposing not only the flaws in policy, but also the fragility of Starmer's political position. What made Badenoch's attack so effective wasn't just the content, it was the conviction. She didn't speak in vague terms or rely on partisan platitudes. She used cold, hard numbers and real-world examples. From small business owners unable to cover heating costs to families in council estates facing blackouts, she gave voice to the voiceless. And in doing so, she revealed a government more interested in ideology than impact. As cameras captured Starmer's increasingly tense expression, the public watching at home witnessed something rare. A leader being held to account, not with theatrics, but with brutal honesty. The entire episode revealed a critical fault line in British politics, one between those pushing a hurried, expensive green agenda and those demanding a responsible, balanced approach. Kemi Badenoch had made it abundantly clear which side she stood on. And as the chamber echoed with applause and protest, one thing became clear. The battle for Britain's future was no longer about left or right, it was about realism versus rhetoric. This exchange had implications far beyond energy bills or environmental targets. It spoke to a deeper frustration boiling beneath the surface of British society, a sense that those in power had stopped listening. In that moment, Badenoch became more than just a minister challenging a prime minister. She became a voice for millions of disillusioned voters who felt betrayed, neglected, and ignored. And as Parliament adjourned, the impact of her words could still be felt reverberating across the country, promising more turbulence to come. The atmosphere in the chamber turned electric as Kemi Badenoch shifted the conversation to one of the most polarising issues in British politics: immigration. With surgical precision, she launched into a devastating critique of Keir Starmer's approach, accusing him of abandoning national interests in favour of globalist ideals that had left Britain vulnerable and fractured. Her words were sharp, unapologetic, and impossible to ignore. She painted a damning picture of a prime minister more interested in appeasing international institutions than protecting the livelihoods and safety of British citizens. The crowd, still stirred from her previous takedown on energy, leaned in. As the clash escalated, Badenoch didn't waste time dancing around the issue. She began by pointing to the overwhelming pressure being placed on local councils, public housing, the NHS, and schools, all of which, she claimed, had been stretched to the brink by unchecked immigration policies under Starmer's watch. According to her, Labour had created a situation where legal and illegal migrants alike were being prioritised over British citizens, with resources being funnelled into support systems that were already on the verge of collapse. The result, she argued, was a perfect storm of resentment, division, and insecurity, fostered not by the people, but by a political class detached from everyday reality. She cited specific data that jolted the chamber. Since Starmer's tenure began, net migration had soared to record highs, with tens of thousands arriving each month. Yet, rather than tightening controls or re-evaluating the system, Starmer had expanded visa pathways and weakened enforcement. Badenoch accused him of sending a dangerous message to the world, that Britain was open not just to those in genuine need, but to those looking to exploit a broken system. She warned that this wasn't compassion, it was recklessness dressed up as virtue, and the British people were paying the price. Her most cutting moment came when she accused Starmer of betraying the working class, his own historical base. Once the party of miners, factory workers, and local communities, Labour had, in Badenoch's words, become the party of NGOs, lobbyists, and Twitter activists. Working-class voters, particularly in places like Birmingham, Stoke, and parts of London, were now facing skyrocketing housing prices, longer NHS wait times, and rising crime, all while being lectured about tolerance by politicians living in gated communities and sending their children to private schools. The hypocrisy, Badenoch declared, was both staggering and unforgivable. What truly set the chamber ablaze was her brutal takedown of Labour's handling of asylum seekers. Badenoch claimed that under Starmer's leadership, Britain's asylum system had turned into a free-for-all, with applicants facing little scrutiny and vast numbers being housed at taxpayer expense in three-star hotels, while veterans and homeless citizens were left to sleep rough. "This isn't policy," she thundered. "This is surrender." The reaction was immediate. Audible gasps, shouts, and even applause echoed across the floor. The nation was watching, and Badenoch was making sure they saw every failure laid bare. She went further, accusing Labour of labelling any criticism of immigration policy as racist or xenophobic, effectively silencing debate and demonising anyone who dared to raise valid concerns. Badenoch refused to be cowed by such tactics. "Calling the British people bigots for wanting secure borders," she declared, "isn't progressive. It's pathetic." Her defiance struck a chord with millions who had grown tired of walking on eggshells while their neighbourhoods changed beyond recognition and their voices were ignored. The Prime Minister, for his part, attempted to deflect, citing global humanitarian obligations and international law, but Badenoch was unrelenting. She accused Starmer of hiding behind treaties while failing to renegotiate the outdated and lopsided agreements that kept Britain bound to obligations that no longer served its interests. "A true leader," she said, "doesn't just accept the rules, they rewrite them when their people are at risk." The sheer force of her challenge left Starmer visibly shaken. His responses grew clipped, his tone defensive. The tide of momentum had clearly turned. Outside Westminster, the public reaction was immediate. Social media platforms exploded with clips of Badenoch's tirade. Commentators from all corners weighed in, with many praising her bravery and clarity. Even those typically aligned with Labour admitted that her critique had struck a nerve. Polling. Analysts began speculating that this exchange could mark a pivotal shift in public opinion. Immigration, long treated as a political third rail, had been dragged into the light, and Badenoch had wielded it like a weapon. In the aftermath of the debate, murmurs of leadership challenges and reshuffles began circulating within the Labour ranks. Starmer's authority, once seen as unshakable, now appeared tenuous. He had been caught flat-footed, exposed on national television, and humiliated by a minister who wasn't afraid to say what others only whispered in private. The public, disillusioned and weary of platitudes, had witnessed something rare, a political figure unafraid to put country before career. For Badenoch, the moment was more than just a political victory. It was a statement of intent. She had thrown down the gauntlet not only to Starmer, but to the entire political establishment. Her message was clear. If Britain is to regain control of its borders, restore faith in its institutions, and heal its internal divisions, then it must start by telling the truth, even if that truth is uncomfortable. And as the chamber slowly emptied and the headlines rolled out across the nation, one thing was certain. Kemi Badenoch was no longer just a rising star. She had become a force to be reckoned with. the dramatic showdown between Kemi Badenoch and A. Keir Starmer has left the nation on edge, raising urgent questions about the future of British politics and the direction this country will take. Now more than ever, it is crucial for citizens to stay informed, engaged, and ready to demand accountability from their leaders. The issues exposed in this debate, from immigration policy failures to Labour's disconnect from working class, voters cannot be ignored or swept under the carpet. Every voice counts in shaping the next chapter of Britain's story. This is a moment that calls for action, not silence. Whether you agree or disagree with Badenoch's stance, one thing is undeniable. The status quo is under pressure and change is imminent. The question now is what kind of change will come and who will lead it? Will politicians listen to the people who elected them, or will they continue to prioritise their own power games and party lines? The future of communities across the UK hangs in the balance. Stay alert to breaking news and developments in this ongoing political battle. Engage with your local representatives and hold them accountable for how they handle these critical issues. Share your opinions on social media, attend community meetings, and make your voice heard in every possible way. Political change is driven by active citizens who refuse to be bystanders. Your participation can help steer Britain toward a safer, fairer, and more prosperous future. Above all, don't let sensational headlines distract from the real stakes. This clash is not just political theatre. It is a fight over the values, priorities, and identity of the nation itself. Keep watching, keep questioning, and keep demanding the truth. Only through vigilance and involvement can the people reclaim the power that has too long been ceded to career politicians. As this story unfolds, remember, your awareness and your actions matter. The next chapter is unwritten, and it depends on all of us. Will you stay silent, or will you rise and make your voice impossible to ignore? The choice is yours.